Welcome to The Trader, a Spotify Top 10 Traitors podcast. My name's Matthew. I'm a writer working in unscripted TV development, and I am a 100% faithful fan of the multi-award winning hit TV competition series, The Traitors. This podcast features deep dives into every episode of the show, as well as interviews with contestants. And this season of the podcast is dedicated to season 2 of The Traitors New Zealand. To help me discuss episodes 5 and 6, I'm joined again by David Bloomberg.
Hello. Yes. Hi. How are you? I guess I'm asking everyone, not just you. I don't know who I'm
Me?
talking to here at this point. Yeah. How are you? How are you doing?
I'm great.
It's not like we've done this introduction like dozens of times or something. So yes, for those who don't know me, I am David Bloomberg, and I am a 100% Traitorous fan. I, of course, have been covering reality TV for over 24 years, online, in newspapers, on my own websites, on podcasts, on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and, well, basically anywhere that I can.
And David, I think you've been my lucky charm because we've now reached 400 subscribers on YouTube.
Woo!
Hooray! So I put out a little plea last time, so my ego was appeased for now.
Good, good. Now we got to get to 500.
Yes, 500 is the next goal, and eventually I will reach your 30K, I'm sure of it.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And you can tell us later on in the podcast where we can find you on YouTube, of
Yes.
course. Also, one more thing before we get into the episode for today, or the episodes, plural, is just to say thank you to listener Dean. I think Dean's been listening for quite a long time to the podcast. Dean has sent in a contribution on the coffee page for the podcast. And usually I'd mention it at the end, but I guess I could mention it now. If you feel like you also want to help out with the running of the podcast and you've been enjoying listening, you could visit ko-fi.com/Matthew Keeley, and you can put in a one-off donation of any amount you feel like. And the link is in the episode description too. One more thing that I'll mention now, but we'll come back to later on in this episode, is there will be a special in-person trader gathering in London very soon. I've mentioned this kind of before on the podcast, but I have a few more details now. So stay tuned. At the end of today's episode, I will explain a little bit further what this all means. So,
I don't. I just to guess, I probably won't make it.
What? It's cancelled. Right, the gathering's off.
Well, how many of those? How many coffee donations have you had? Does it cover round trip air tickets from Illinois, USA to London?
Not yet, but maybe
Okay.
this podcast, this episode might push it over the
Okay,
line.
okay.
So we'll see how it goes. Now, before we get into episodes 5 and 6, our final thing to do is to set up our own game of betrayal and deception. This is the Trader Traitor. Our not-so-secret mission from here on in is to tell one lie to one another. The lie has to be a fabrication or a made-up fact, big or small, about the traitors, about ourselves, or anything else. For example, I could lie to David and say that I too have spent an hour trapped in a wooden box on a beach. However, I couldn't say that the banishments in episodes 5 and 6 went exactly as I predicted. That would be a fake opinion, a fake thought. So we're looking for fake facts in our game rather than fake thoughts and feelings. I think from memory last week, neither of us detected one another's lies. We were far too sneaky.
Hold on. No, that's wrong. Has the game started yet? Wait.
The game has not officially started
Oh,
yet.
okay. Then yeah, that's right.
But our game does begin right now.
All right. So I will be coming to London. That's I just no.
I think we are ready to get into episodes 5 and 6 then of
Yes.
The Traitors New Zealand Season 2. We start off episode 5 with a recap from the previous episode. We're reminded that Andrew, Bree, and Noel were put on, well, I'm calling it death row because they've called it that in
Yeah,
other seasons. They kind of don't really give it a name here. And of course, what happens is that the three of them turn on one another in the management room. Bree, in particular, blindsided Andrew by coming for him after pretending all day that she had agreed with him and was going to come for Noel as a traitor. Of
which was
course.
definitely the most entertaining thing Brie did. I have to say that was it was. I mean, it was. We'll talk about it more, but I don't think anything that Brie has done has been great strategy. But damn, she's been entertaining.
Yeah, really, really good fun to watch.
Yeah,
Yeah. Of course, the truth is that not one of them is a traitor, but
yeah,
we have that advantage over the players. Andrew is then banished, and Jane tells us that it was a good night for the traitors. Episode 5 then begins at breakfast. Mark, Donna, and Joe are the first to arrive. Mark is telling us he was sure Andrew was a traitor. He can't believe it. But Donna is the complete opposite. She's devastated about Andrew's banishment. She claims she knew he was definitely not a traitor. In fact, she is convinced that Noel or Bree is a traitor, which she then tells some of the others, including Jason, who apparently has come to do some construction work. Does
yes.
he has he been wearing this the whole season and I just haven't noticed?
No, they made a comment about like some vests he's worn, so I don't know why. I mean, it. This is breakfast. I don't think you're going to get run over by a car.
Yeah, yes. It's, it's a choice.
Yes.
It makes him stand out. So
Yeah,
at least
literally. I mean, that's the whole point of it. Yes.
yes. So like, I mean, I think before now I actually probably didn't really know who Jason was. So he's got a sort of distinguishing feature
That's
now, I
right.
guess. Uh, Ciale is another player who is angry about Andrew's banishment. He says he didn't suspect Andrew at all. And Donna then delivers what has become a sort of trope in the Traitors, a classic Traitors line along the lines of, if X happens, then banish me tomorrow. So she gives everyone this
Yes.
sort of, she strikes this deal. In this case, she says, if the last person to arrive at breakfast today isn't a traitor, banish me tomorrow. She's convinced.
Mhm.
She says she'll be writing down the name of this person no matter what. Um, I, what I think it's short-sighted to make claims like this.
Yes.
And actually, there's a little interview clip of Mark agreeing. He
Hmm.
basically says the same thing.
He said, that's a
Are
terrible
you,
way to play the game.
yeah, to make sort of a decision that you're going to stick to no matter what, I just think doesn't make any sense. Surely new things happen throughout the day, new pieces of
Mhm.
information might come to you. I mean, do you think the same thing?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Mark, maybe for the only time in these entire two episodes, is right. And yeah. And then, you have Steven joining in and explaining why he thinks Donna is wrong. Um, but unfortunately, of course, he outlines that to Mike and Whitney. So
Yeah.
those are not the two people who you should be explaining things to. Um, but I think you have Mark and Steven are the two people who in this game think logically. A lot of the rest of them run around like chickens with their heads cut off, and Mark and Steven try to come up with plots and plans to work things out. How does that work out for them? Well, we'll get there, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think they're at least trying to be a bit more flexible or open-minded and
Mm-hmm.
willing to consider different theories. And I understand someone, like Donna saying, being really passionate and saying, the opposite can be true as well, that people change their minds too easily.
Right.
And they're one week they're really on to something, and by the next episode they've all completely forgotten about it. But yeah, I think it's just dangerous to say to everybody in the room, banish me tomorrow if this thing happens or doesn't happen, because
Right.
people might remember that and then banish you, and you'll be really mad that you said that.
I mean, these people have watched the previous seasons. We know that, at least most of them. I feel like Donna has. She should know how many people have said that before and been wrong
Yeah,
because you are not omniscient.
yeah, yeah. Uh, and you're right. My next note was exactly what you've just said. It was about Stephen.
Yeah,
Stephen actually theorizes about what is the truth that
right.
the traitors just chose three faithful for death row and caused absolute chaos. And Whitney's very happy about this. And well, she's not happy about that. Mike and Whitney sort of reluctantly listen to that, I think, because they're
Hmm.
probably thinking, "Oh, he's kind of onto us. That's not good."
Yeah,
So, Brittany arrives. She says she really misses Andrew. They had a bond, and she mentions that maybe people need to reevaluate. Or she says she needs to reevaluate all of her
hmm,
relationships now. And she then theorizes about Whitney. Her and Bailey both say that they haven't really gotten close to her or that they can't get a read on her. And Brittany also says, well, Whitney was very close with Jackie and they both accused me of being a traitor. And of course, now
right.
Jackie's gone. So Whitney is Brittany's. This is it's the rhyming is confusing. Whitney is Brittany's.
It won't be for long. Spoiler alert.
True. Yes, in either case,
Yeah.
um, Whitney is Brittany's next big hunch, but
Yes.
she does realize this is Brittany. Brittany realizes that in this game you can't go all out and attack at the round table without numbers to support you. Uh, even if you should go after them at all. That's
Right.
not Brittany saying that. That's me saying that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think even if you do have an incredibly strong suspicion about a traitor, maybe you don't tell anyone. Maybe you just keep
Hmm.
that to yourself for a little bit longer. We're
Instead
not
of telling everything and then the traders come around to you later.
exactly, and we'll get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean we're not even halfway through the season at this point. This is
Right.
episode 5, so I don't think you desperately are trying to get out every traitor immediately right
Right.
now.
And again, for people who may not have listened before, part of that is if you get out all the traders, they just add more.
Yeah, yeah,
And then you have no idea who they are unless you can detect their changes in, mood or attitude or the way they act.
yeah,
So, yeah, there's not a whole lot of point. Hey, we got another. You could get all the traders in a row, and then there'll be more traders.
yeah, exactly. Uh, Now here is where we get the two sort of teasing shots of Bree and Noel receiving
Mhm.
letters, and we saw this in the preview at the end of last week's episode.
Well, I saw it in the preview. You
You
didn't watch
you
the
did. I
preview.
saw a moment of it and then turned it off. Um, it's yeah. I don't think this has been done before. So they give them both a letter,
Right.
and it turns out that Noel is just receiving a letter simply saying you have not been murdered by the traitors. I don't think this is in any of the English speaking versions. I don't think they've employed this little trick.
No, I think it was sneaky of the producers to do that. I mean, almost gave the poor kid a heart attack, but I wonder if they did it just so they could get a preview of it,
Yeah, I
like that
think
they were
so.
thinking that far ahead. But it wasn't anything special like I had theorized. There wasn't any special immunity for him. I just didn't expect them to give him a letter that says, "Nope, you're good."
Yeah, yeah, I think it was purely for the sake of giving
Hmm.
a little tease somewhere.
Right.
So we know what's happening. So Noel has survived and Bree has been chosen for murder. Noel arrives at breakfast at this point. He tells Jane he's going to fight today. He gives a little interview clip saying that he had given up before, but now he's sort of more determined. He doesn't want to be like that anymore. We get a flashback to the conclave. The traitors basically were more confident that Noel would likely get himself banished, so they don't
Yeah.
really need to murder him. And they're worried that Bree had too much sympathy from the group because post banishment she got really upset. So that might make people think, oh, she seems like a faithful.
Yep.
Uh,
It went as I predicted.
yeah. I've just made a silly note here. It's totally inconsequential that I was watching this episode with subtitles. I put them on because I couldn't. There was something that Noel said when Noel hugged Jane and he said, I'll fight. I couldn't understand what he was saying. So I put subtitles on. And I don't know if a human does the subtitles or if it's AI, but I think it must be AI because it thinks that every time someone says traitor, they're saying trader with a D.
Yeah.
Uh, So because of the New Zealand accent, and I guess like an American accent, they sound kind of the same if you don't
Oh,
pronounce the T.
yeah. When I do, because sometimes I will do voice to text when I'm composing a tweet or something like that. And I'd say a solid 75% or more of the time, I have to go back and manually fix from traders to traitors.
Yeah. So I had a little laugh throughout this episode every time someone was accused of being a traitor. So, back to breakfast. Noel tries to explain to the others that, he's trying to defend himself now, and he's saying, "Look, me being pegged as a traitor is it's too convenient. It's too obvious. This is exactly what the real traitors wanted."
Right.
We'll see if people buy it or not as the episode goes on.
Yeah.
Uh,
How
Paul,
dare another one who dares to use logic?
yeah, exactly. Uh, Paul arrives. This time he knocks off Bree's portrait with his cane rather than risking
Yes.
his life on some
Yeah.
ladders that he nearly falls from. He mentions things about he's giving them clues about the mission. He talks about the nautical air and visiting the seaside, and he tells them that they have to get into groups, four groups of four, and once they've done that, each team has to volunteer one person, one brave soul, as he calls them, who is good in tight spaces and good at holding their breath. I thought they were going to be doing some like underwater thing. It
Oh
was
yeah.
it was reminding me of Survivor, holding
Yeah.
onto the grill. But it wasn't really as intense as that. It wasn't so bad,
No, it
as
was
it
it
turns out.
was nothing. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't want to be someone who's claustrophobic, but other than that,
Yeah.
eh,
Holding your breath, not so much. Not
yeah.
an issue. Four people have to volunteer, and it turns out to be Mark and Mike. That's my brother's names. Mark, Mike,
Huh.
Joe, and Noel. They're the volunteers. And Joe immediately seems to reject that, or regret that, I should say. So we move out to. We actually, normally we see them move around the house and discuss things at this
Hmm.
point. The pace moves on fairly quickly, and they just all end up outside by the looks of it, getting ready for the mission. I'm guessing it was sort of a drive away, so they had to leave quite early
Yeah.
or something. Noel is debriefing on what happened last night and how
Hmm.
he knew Andrew was going to come for him, and that's why he was so dejected in the banishment room. Cialy is listening to this, isn't really buying any of it. Mike then steps in, and Mike, who's been very quiet thus far in the season, so quiet that other people have commented on it more than once, he
Hmm.
to me, unexpectedly takes Bailey aside and asks her thoughts on Whitney. He says that, I think this is in his confessional, he says the time has come sooner than he thought to potentially turn on a fellow traitor. I wondered if he maybe overheard Bailey and Brittany at breakfast. I think he was sitting near them. I'm not 100% sure, but I could, because they were talking about Whitney. I wonder if he heard them and so thought, well, hey, other people are starting to mention Whitney. Why don't I just jump on this?
Hmm.
He also talks to Molly and Mark about his thoughts. And his big piece of evidence that he wants to use is from the mission yesterday. He's suggesting that she's a fraud, Whitney, because she couldn't tell a cow's lung from a foot, even though she claims to be a mortician, a funeral director.
Yeah.
I mean, it's objectively, it's really silly reasoning. It doesn't
Yes.
have anything to do with her being a traitor, but I think Mike realizes that in this game, people use silly reasons for things.
Right.
So he's
Yeah,
just using it to prove the point that she may have lied about something. And so if she's lying about that, she could be
right.
lying about being a traitor.
Yeah, I'm just confused what it's supposed to show. Like you said, is it aha, she's untrustworthy because she lied about what she does for a living. Okay, but that doesn't make her a traitor.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, I
I,
think it's just this
if it works
general
though, yeah,
sense.
if it works, then it's a good move, for him.
Yeah.
It's just like we said, from a logical standpoint, it's like I would look at him and be like, and
Well, yeah, why does that mean she's a traitor?
yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, spoiler alert. it does work.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
and maybe I'm going to give Mike credit. Maybe he just realizes that about the other players. Like they'll
Right.
fall for this. Like if
Hmm.
I guess you've got so little to go on, really, he thinks, well, if I can make them believe that she's lying about some things, maybe they'll believe that. Yeah, she's just a sort of duplicitous person,
Right.
and she's
Right.
come here to hide her true. I don't know why, but she's come here with
Yeah.
lots of lies. Maybe her real name isn't even Whitney, and what else don't we know about her?
Hmm.
So yeah, that's the tactic he's going for, and he's sticking to it. It's time for the mission then. So the four brave souls are trapped in boxes on the beach. The other teams have 20 minutes to put their hands into mysterious boxes filled with what turns out to be soup, mouse traps, and I think meat and hair, or meat and
Yes.
fur.
That's what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah. They have to feel around for 3D digits that are stuck to the walls of the boxes, figure out what
I was
the digits are.
I was waiting for Whitney to reach in and say, "Oh, it's another cow's hoof."
Yeah, she's that at least that might have made everyone laugh.
Yeah.
So the digits then give the combination to the locks on the boxes on the beach. And as well as silver bars, the fastest team to complete this will also win shields with a bit of a twist that we don't know yet.
Hmm.
Jason is the only person, once they start the mission, who seems to notice that there are two numbers in one of the boxes, a six and a zero. Despite this,
Which,
I'm
by the
not.
way, how did they know it was a six and not a nine?
Well, very good question.
I mean, the only thing I could think of is that it was okay. This is the direction we're facing, type of
Yeah,
thing.
maybe. Um, it's the mission goes ahead. There's lots of
Right.
like hands in boxes and running about, and despite Jason realizing that there are two numbers in one box, actually it's Jane, Kat, Donna, and Mark who succeed first. Basically, by it's when they realize they've missed a digit, they don't bother running back to check what it
Right.
was. They just think, well, it's going to be between 0 and 9. Let's just go
Yeah.
through them all.
That's what I was thinking too. If you know the order, so if they know it's this box, this box, this box, because like in Survivor, when you get digits, it can be any one of different ones, and you have to try different combinations. In this case, it seems, I mean, different combinations of four different digits that would take a while to go
Yeah,
through.
yeah,
So they must have had box one, box two, box three, and they knew, okay, but yeah, I wondered why don't they just do this when the first group sent someone running up,
yeah.
and then
I
lo
mean,
and behold,
yeah, I guess I suppose they didn't know where the extra digit was missing
that's what I
from,
was just thinking as I was saying it. If you don't know which box it's in,
but again,
hmm,
I guess Jane just seems to figure out like, well, even that, it can only be in one
mhm,
of four places. So
right,
they figure out that just doing
right,
some guesswork, it will still be quicker than running all the way
right,
back up to the boxes. And she's right, and it works. And
hmm,
yeah, I was watching thinking, why did no one else think of that? But hey, they're in a rush. They're panicked. They're
right,
stressed. Jane's obviously very clever. So anyway, they all end up getting their trap people out of the boxes, and of course, they make it back in time to Paul perfectly. They don't even
yes,
bother with a countdown timer. They don't even do a
yeah,
fake. You've got 5 seconds. They sort of just all run back, and Paul says, "Hurrah, you made it." So the winning team gets their box of shields, only to discover that actually there are only two inside the box.
hmm,
And I didn't realize straight away, but the other players also don't see that. I think they open it and look, but everybody else doesn't everyone else I think realizes that something's wrong, but they don't see that there are
well,
two.
right. I think Paul said there's not enough for all of you, but he
Yeah,
doesn't specify if there's one, two, or three.
yeah. Uh, and Paul tells them that they have the car ride back to the house to discuss who will
Hmm.
take the shields. And then they also have a McDonald's in the car.
Yes.
It's like, are they being sponsored?
Well, I think, well, probably, but I think also, we've talked about before, they obviously put more money into the overall production of this. got to make cuts somewhere. And, instead of having to worry about them going to the dining room and eating a meal, nah, just hand them McDonald's in the car.
Yeah. It really struck me as odd and also made me wonder if I can get sponsored by McDonald's for this podcast. So
Yeah,
if anyone's got any connections with the marketing team at McDonald's, let me know. So we're in the cars then, and in the winning car, Jane smartly again points out that they don't need to tell the others who they decide to give the shields to. And this
right.
is a tactic we've seen in other versions of the show. Again, makes me think Jane and other players are watching they've seen the show, they remember
Yes.
these clever things to
Yes.
do. Because actually, Ben in another car figures out the same thing. He says, "Oh, hey, if they're smart, they won't tell us who they give the shields to." And actually, just a little note here that it's not the first time that I've noticed Ben being quite clever, and
That's
because
funny because I never remember Ben's on the show. So,
oh well, Ben in episode 1 or 2 was the player who he thinks Jane is a traitor, but has decided to keep it a secret and not tell
mm,
anyone. And he even like him and some of the others call Jane like mum. So he thinks, well, I'll keep her close. But
I,
Ben is on
I
to
think you're
Jane.
lying. I think you just made up this whole Ben person entirely.
Could be my lie. Maybe Ben's not real. So, so I think Ben is, uh, unless he gets murdered, one to watch.
Yeah.
So the winning car agrees not only to not tell everybody who they gave the shields to, but actually to not even tell them how many shields there were.
Right.
Mark suggests that Donna and Kat take the shields because, well, they've never been under any suspicion at Round Table. So, even if the traitors somehow figured out who had the shields or one of them decided to
Hmm.
go and blab and tell everybody, they probably wouldn't murder Jane or Mark because Jane or Mark have had at least they've been
Right.
on some people's tradars at some point.
Yes. I think it's a fairly a good percentage chance that they would not murder Jane.
Yeah, yeah. Well, exactly. Well, a good insight there, David.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. That's why people listen to me here for insight like that.
Meanwhile, Whitney knows that she is also beginning to be on some people's radars, and so she asks the people in her car if anyone wants to ask her any questions, address anything. Bailey in the back seat brings up the animal body part
Hmm.
challenge, and Whitney says, "Well, who was talking about this?" Bailey simply says, "I don't want to say." We arrive back at the house then, and
Which may be the first time ever in Trader's history that someone didn't spill the name of the person.
exactly, yeah, I was surprised that she didn't
Yeah.
she didn't reveal. Back at the house, Mike takes a Brittany aside and he wants to chat about Whitney again. And he talks about, Hoofgate slash
Yes.
Longgate. And interestingly, it seemed from Brittany's reaction, it's the first she's heard of it. She's really shocked and surprised when he explains this thing about the mission. Whitney then does this thing where there's a montage of her interviewing people like it's The Apprentice. She
Yes.
talks to
We don't
Nolan,
talk
is
about
it?
The Apprentice in the US.
Oh, sorry. I meant UK Apprentice, of course. Uh, she talks to Noel. She talks to Cialy. She talks to Jason. She's telling them all slightly different things.
Yeah.
She claims that she couldn't cope playing this game as a traitor. She says that she's even struggling as a faithful. She's complimenting Noel on being really good with words. And but then on the other hand, she talks to Cialy and Jason
Right.
and reminds them, Noel was the only survivor from death row, so he's a bit
Mm.
suspicious, and let's not forget him. And we move right onto the round table from here, I'm pretty sure,
Yes.
unless I've left out some notes on
Nope.
a section.
No. Yeah.
So at round table, it's very tense. Mike just goes for it. Mike begins the
Mm.
discussion. It's really, I mean, on one hand, it's very brave of him, and I think you can tell that he's nervous. On the other hand, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, I don't know if it's a good idea that Mike is doing this, but we'll get there.
He should have told someone else to bring it. Oh wait, we'll get to that next episode.
Yeah, exactly. He goes for Whitney. He tells her he's been suspicious of her since day one.
Hmm.
obviously, because, you know.
Yeah. Hmm.
And he explains his surprise at her inability to tell a hoof from an internal organ. And it's the most upfront we've seen Mike, you know.
Right.
And I was worried at this point. He's doing too much. I think he might reveal that something. I worry already that he's going to alert people to the fact that something strange is
Right.
going on with his behavior. Whitney is clearly shocked and livid with him. She's her the only defense we see her give, and this could be all down to just editing. She just says, "Well, animals are different to humans." That's kind of all she's really got to say about it.
Yeah,
Um,
because mammal lungs often feel like
Solid.
mammal hooves.
Yeah. I mean, even if she just said something like, "Look, I know it was a silly thing to say, but I knew I was never going to guess what organ it was, so I just said hoof kind of as a joke because I knew we
Right.
no one was going to get it right. So
Yeah.
I didn't think there was even a point in trying. But she did. We don't see her say anything like that.
No.
Britt then gets brought into the discussion. She attacks Whitney as well, and again she
Well,
said,
she gets brought into it because Whitney, it's like Mike goes after Whitney. And instead of Whitney going back at Mike, which I thought she might do, she's like, but
she
what
sort
about
of,
Brittany?
yeah, she
Yeah, she kind of,
diverts. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Brittany brings up again that, well, Whitney, you and Jackie were sort of teaming up against me, and we all
Hmm.
know now that Jackie was a traitor. Therefore, that makes me think you and her were in cahoots. You must be a traitor too. The whole time, we get lots of shots of Jane just watching this unfold. At this point, I made a naive note. I don't think she knew what Mike was planning,
Yeah.
which turns out to be yes, exactly. She
Yes.
had no
Right.
idea. But so she's obviously just listening to all of this happening and is having to decide on the spot what way
Hmm.
to go and what to do. Donna then comes into the discussion. It seems like she's sticking to her plan to vote for no. That's what she says
Yep.
anyway. Ciali backs her up and he says that he noticed a smile on Noel's face last night at round table.
Ugh.
And I, I, my, my feeling when I was watching this was I actually felt sorry for Noel, and I thought,
Yeah.
this must be really frustrating to just have someone accuse you of something really like. How do you defend that? How do you?
Right.
All you can do is deny it and say, "No, I didn't." But if someone
I
is
mean,
saying,
we've seen it on other traders shows where it's like, oh, you made a face. Oh, you locked eyes with them. You breathed as the host was walking by.
"Yeah,
Your eyes got watery. Whatever. It's all stupid stuff.
yeah," so
And
if
we'll see it again next episode too, by the way.
yeah, so if Ciali has convinced himself of a feeling or an observation,
Hmm.
I, I think we know it's probably not accurate. But in the room, I don't know what Noel's supposed to do about that.
Right.
He's quite calm in his response, actually. I think I would have been getting really
Hmm.
angry, but he's very contained and controlled. He talks about relying on logic and reason. He
What?
says,
What? How dare he?
crazy, crazy. He says that, look, all sorts of everybody around the table is coming at me with all sorts of accusations. I don't really know what to do other than present you with what I think are facts. And there's this strange thing that happens while Noel is talking. Donna and Utah exchange a look. I I think I misinterpreted it. I thought they were looking at each other with it. I thought their look implied that they didn't believe anything he was saying. But actually, then when the votes come in, which they're about to think, there's a few votes that surprise me. So the first six votes end up with a tie. So Whitney votes for Noel, and she says this really silly thing. She turns his slate over and says, "I'm now wishing I wrote down another name." And I thought, well, he could have. Like
Yeah,
he
I
just
mean,
wrote it.
you were literally the first one.
Yeah. So
And I mean, my first thought was, oh, are we being shown this out of order? But Paul said, let's start with Whitney.
yeah, yeah. So
So,
it was
and let,
kind of a silly thing to say, I
yeah,
think. So Whitney votes no. Bailey then votes no. And at this point, I thought, oh, This is first two votes are for Noel. This is not good for Mike, and I was envisioning a situation where
Yes,
Whitney
me too.
stays, and it's a horrible atmosphere in the
Well, okay,
conclave.
so let me say this. Whitney may have metagamed it. She knows, or she should know by now, that they start in a place so that by the time it gets to the end, it will seem close.
Yeah,
So the fact that they started with her, she may have been like, crap. Now I'm in trouble. Clearly, he's not going to be the one who goes.
yeah, yeah. Ben and Molly and Cialy all then vote for Whitney, and this is I was surprised that Cialy. I was sure he was going to go for Noel. Mark also votes for Noel. So it's a tie at this point. Three votes each. Three for Noel, three for Whitney. The votes go on, and it sort of becomes a landslide almost. Jane, Kat, Joe, Mike all go for Whitney. Donna votes for Noel. Stephen votes for Mark.
Yeah,
So it's obvious that Stephen's just going to go a bit rogue, do his own thing. I, from my when I think back on all the other versions of the show, I think there are always a couple of players who do this. There are
right.
always a couple of players who just they don't go with the group, which is probably the smart thing to do. They go with their own instincts no matter what
Mm-hmm.
everybody else is doing. Um, and we can talk about that at some point. But Brittany then votes for Whitney, and when I sort of added votes up at that point, that was the nail in the coffin, really. At this point, Whitney is going they
Mm-hmm.
don't. Paul doesn't point this out. There's no voiceover, but I just sort of added it up, and I thought, oh, right, she's gone.
Yeah.
Utah also votes for Whitney, and that was also a surprise to me. Again, I thought Utah was going to vote for Noel because we had this shot of him and Donna earlier looking at each other while Noel was talking. Anyway, Jason votes for Noel, and Noel votes for Whitney. So Whitney is gone. She stands up. She says, I've had a wonderful time. I'm very much looking forward to going home. There are people who are dying to see me. Everyone laughs. Took me a moment to get the joke.
Yeah. Me too.
She then says, I have a secret. And I wondered, is she going to say that she isn't a funeral director? Is that the secret and that they were right? Or is she going to say, my real name is not Whitney. I'm the person with the fake name. But no, she simply reveals I am and pauses dramatically and announces also dramatically a traitor.
Yeah,
There
I
are
think she should have, and maybe they edited it. I think she should have said, I have a secret. I am really a funeral director, and I'm also a traitor.
yeah. So there are huge celebrations in the room. Jane's going wild, but
Yes.
she moves around the table, hugs Mike, and I'm going to have to swear. She says we need to have a fucking talk, boy.
Yeah.
So, and at this, I just wrote here, oh shit, I'm a little bit scared of Jane. So, and I think Mike is too.
Yeah.
So they celebrate. Whitney goes off. Paul tells them. He says he does this funny thing because he tells them tonight there will be another murder. And I thought, oh, I'm surprised he's saying this because won't there be a possible recruitment tonight? Like he says it so certainly. And actually, then later on, spoiler, he does give them the option to possibly
Hmm.
recruit. But it's just funny that
Yeah.
he says to them, there will be another murder.
Yeah, but they
Anyway,
always do that. I mean, it annoys me every time because Alan
okay.
has done it and the other, they say there will be another murder. And that's my impression of your accent.
Well done.
And then there isn't one because there's a recruitment, but they always have to get that line in.
Yeah, yeah. I just never noticed it before,
Yeah.
but I guess maybe now that I'm so attuned to the game, I know what's coming. So we see some sort of debriefing after the banishment room. There are some discussions in the house. Brittany, I think we mentioned this before,
But
Brittany, or we alluded to this.
hmm
Brittany's worried that she might get murdered tonight because she has now voted out both traitors and has been quite
hmm
vocal about voting both of them out. And I sort of think maybe you should have thought about that before now.
Yeah, little late now.
Yeah.
Um, also, as they leave the round table, before they're even sitting around talking, Noel is leaving and he's celebrating, going, I told you, faithful. It's like, no, actually, this result doesn't prove that at all. You could still be a traitor, just
Yeah,
like Whitney was.
yeah,
Um, so we've seen that before, where people act like, the fact that you didn't vote me out proves that I'm a faithful. No, it doesn't. It just proves they weren't thinking of you today, And
yeah.
but
You're right, but I think we also it's not just the players saying that about themselves.
right.
I've noticed this in many series before
Hmm.
that amongst the players generally they do this. They've got this habit of quite often at a banishment room, the vote comes down. It's split between two people. One of them goes, and the other person just sort of escapes. Like the next
Yeah,
banishment room, they don't go, well, you also had loads of votes last time. Maybe we should just stick to it. People, they move on so quickly in this game. But the best example I can think of that always sort of baffled me was in spoiler alert, kind of, if you've not seen UK season one. So skip forward 30 seconds if you don't want to hear this. Wilf, who was a traitor
hmm
in season one of UK, he turned on a fellow traitor, halfway through the season, episode six, I think. And that's not my lie. I just think I remember episode six really well. And
okay.
there was another traitor called Alyssa. He voted her out, big shock. And at that moment, lots of people had suspected Wilf of being a traitor, but they all then just assumed that meant he was 100% faithful. Oh my God, Wilf, how did we ever doubt you? And he makes it all the way to the end of the season after that. And
I,
the whole rest of the season, it baffled me why that was enough to convince them.
I think that being like one of the first seasons anywhere,
Yeah, yeah.
people weren't into the meta of the traders turning on each other yet.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Including me as a
So,
viewer, like when I watched it the first time, my mind was blown. Hey, I hadn't
right.
thought that a traitor would do this to another
Well, and lots
traitor.
of people were commenting on things like, he's cheating, and you're not allowed to do that. It's like, yes, you are.
Yeah, of course.
Um, but yeah, I had predicted that Noel would not survive. And he owes Mike for
Yeah,
surviving because
yeah,
Mike decided to make his move. But yeah, it's kind of like it's almost like a competition. Like, oh, you made it through, you move on, and therefore we're not considering you again. Or, it's like, no, no, they can both be guilty or,
yeah,
you know, so
yeah. It's a strange pattern.
yeah.
Jane keeps saying that, she didn't see things going that way. Although she did vote for Whitney, so it's a bit
She didn't
strange
see
to
things
say.
ahead of time going
Yeah,
that way, I think.
yeah. And she is sitting in one of the rooms and says, I didn't expect Mike to come out like that. And actually, Mike is standing right behind her. She could have said a lot worse. So it's not too
Yes.
bad that you overheard that. And she recovers quite well. She says, oh, there you are. Mike
I've
then,
had that happen where, yeah, you're talking about the person. There was a guy at work who, every time I emailed him, he would respond with a phone call instead of just answering the email. And I was a manager, not over him, but I was still a manager and he wasn't. And so one time I emailed him, my phone rang, and I didn't even answer it. And then I went over to talk to one of my employees, who's also a friend of mine, and I was talking to her, and she was kind of at the end of a short hallway. So
yeah.
my back was to the opening. And I'm sitting there telling her this story, and she kind of looks up. And I'm like, oh, hell, he's right behind me, isn't he? But I
Uh,
didn't care because he was so damn annoying. So, like you said, it could have been worse, I mean,
yeah, she could have been. Yeah, she could have been like swearing, blinding, like he's an
yeah,
idiot. What the hell? Where I think he's
yeah.
a traitor now. And then at this point, we cut to Mike in a confessional saying that he didn't tell Jane what he was going to do in case
Hmm.
she and Whitney had a secret alliance, and that it
Right.
got back to Whitney what was going to happen. Um, but I was
Which
going
is
to ask
smart.
you, yeah. Well, I was gonna ask you a question at this point, but probably ends up being answered in the next episode.
Hmm.
Even by the end of this episode, my question was, has he ruined trust with Jane though?
Hell yes.
Yeah, like I, it's the main thing that I've been thinking about since watching the episode is I just don't know if this was a good idea. And well, I'm going to. This kind of relates to a question that a listener has sent in, so I'll save it till the end of the episode. We've got
Okay.
a couple of listener questions. I am worried for Mike for various reasons. Now,
Yes. Yes, I agree.
we move to the conclave then at the end of the episode. We enter with Jane's voiceover answering my question. She says
Hmm.
she needs to know why Mike did what he did. And Mike then pretends that he makes up this lie. He says Whitney tried to form an alliance with me, and
Hmm.
Whitney's plan had been to go with him to the end, vote out Jackie first, then Jane second. Uh, I think this is just all very risky. I don't think Jane is going to buy this. In fact, I'm pretty sure there's a clip of her saying she doesn't buy this. And Mike is telling us in his interview that he wants to be in control at the conclave. He wants to dictate how the game runs.
Hmm.
It's giving Macbeth to me. It's giving power going to his head.
I thought you're not allowed to say that.
Oh, well, we're not backstage at a theater, so we're okay.
Okay. Okay.
Uh, it's giving Scottish play, I
Yeah.
should say. In fact, yes, we do. We get a clip of Jane in the. I did watch the preview this time, and in the little preview clip, she simply says, "I am never going to trust him."
Yeah.
And from the preview, it looks like Mike will be coming under immediate suspicion for what he's done. And at this point, I hand over to you for episode six.
Yes. Look at that. The preview and poof, here we are. Um, so yes, episode 6 begins as a continuation of the conclave between Jane and Mike, as she tells us she isn't happy about what he did and she'll never trust him, while he thinks he did a good job of convincing her. Uh, Paul walks in and gives them the choice of murdering or recruiting. I'm thinking they'll murder, and Mike pushes in that direction because they don't have time to think about who they'd recruit and can do that later. Mike brings up Brittany. Jane mentions Joe, and then they talk about Ciale having no suspicion on him. As soon as they bring up his name, I agree they should take out Ciale.
Hmm.
Um, Breakfast time. Jane and Mike are the first two in, which is odd, and they both recognize that's odd.
Yeah, yeah.
Next are Kat, Jason, and Steven. Mike starts pushing suspicions about Mark just as Mark, Noel, and Utah come in, with Utah immediately lightly tossing out the idea that Mike was a traitor who turned on a traitor, followed by Mike admitting to Mark that he is coming for him. Mark amusingly tells us he'd be disappointed if someone wasn't bringing up his name. Quote, being suspicious, but not too suspicious, is the absolute best shield there could ever be. He has a point. He
Yeah.
does have a point. The only time this episode he will have a point, I think. Well, maybe not, but close to. So
Yeah, I feel like that's something we have talked about on this
right,
podcast before, that there's a sort of nice spot of like, yeah,
yeah,
having some
it's a
eyes on
tightrope.
you, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's because I guess the listeners might be thinking, well, why on earth would you want eyes on you? But
Hmm.
if everybody universally trusts you and thinks you're faithful, it means you're probably more likely to get murdered. So
Yes.
you
Right.
you need a reason for the traitors to keep you around because they
Hmm.
think there's a little bit of heat on you.
Yeah. Mike says his other suspicion is on Bailey because she ran to Whitney after he told her his plan. Then Bailey and others walk in, as Mark tells us. She has the potential to be an underestimated player because she fades into the background and her voting history has made him suspicious of her. And then I noticed Ciale was in that group, who
Yeah.
came in, and I'm confused because, as I said, I thought he was the best idea of the person to murder.
Is
Um,
that because you think he's smart?
I think he's smart,
And
and he is the exact person you just described. Nobody has any suspicion on him whatsoever.
yeah, yeah.
Um, Donna, Joe, and Brittany are left. Meanwhile, Utah says he suspects Steven because he slings theories around. Yeah, that's called logic, Utah. But those in the know mentioned that Donna had a shield, so it can't be her. And Kat says she's seen him lock eyes, him being Steven, I think, lock eyes with Whitney many times. At this point, I was thinking the thing from last week where he was misunderstood might come back yet today. Um, Spoiler, it didn't, at least not specifically. So
Mhm.
I think they just dropped it in to show, oh, there's a little bit of suspicion on him
Yeah.
without ever reconnecting it, particularly back to that. Donna and Joe walk in. Brittany is gone. So we went from Whitney and Brittany to neither.
Neither.
Uh, she would have been my second choice. And yeah, she's a smart and aggressive player. And as you mentioned, she, had gone after two traitors and gotten them out. So, but also, as we discussed, I would say too aggressive. And this is the result. And I typed those words in my notes before Utah said the same thing.
Yeah, and there's even a flashback to Brittany receiving her letter, and she says herself, I'm not surprised by this in the slightest. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, if you're not surprised, why did you let it happen?
I mean, at least she didn't say the famous thing of I wouldn't
I
change a
regret
thing.
nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Or at least we don't see her saying that. Maybe there's some post-show interview where she does. Who knows? Paul joins them and he finally gets with the program for the portraits by saying, I'll have my people take care of that later. So um, after breakfast, people break into their groups and Utah presses the idea that Mike going after Whitney was traitor on traitor violence. Ciale says it was so unlike Mike, who had barely said anything until then. And he's right. Mike had been doing a good job, in my opinion, of hanging back, but mentioned last episode he wanted to play harder. The thing is, a change in demeanor is one thing that people look for when traitor hunting. I mentioned it earlier, and now that was specifically for a recruit, but also for this.
Yeah.
They also bring up Stephen and Bailey as possibilities. Mark, as well, as Utah says, he's either a really crap faithful or a traitor. In a different group, Molly says, as they were saying goodnight last night, Stephen put his hand on the back of Brittany's chair and said, see ya. Can you believe he said that? Brittany felt like it was ominous and told the rest of that group that if she was murdered that night, it was Stephen. That's right, because he said, see ya.
Like, as if the traitors. Well, I mean, there's just so many
Yes.
things about this. As if
Yes.
A, he, if he was a traitor, he decides himself who's going to get murdered, or that the traitors had already
Mm-hmm.
discussed it. And B, that a traitor would actually say to someone, "See ya," because they were going to kill them.
Yeah, I
It's
mean this is so dumb. This is what I was referencing earlier, where it's like they take these stupid little things that are meaningless and they blow them hugely out of proportion. It's this isn't a mob movie where the kingpin says gives him a kiss on the cheek, which is a sign that he's going to get murdered. No, this is he just said, see ya. No traitor would do this. Even the worst traitors we have ever seen would not do this.
yeah. All I can, my only defense for them is, I have no idea what age Stephen is. I don't know if they think he's like an old, doddering man, and like like he just accidentally let something slip without realizing it. Like maybe that's what's going on. I don't know.
I don't know. Um, anyway, Mark sees that group and believes them all to be faithful, although Jane is among them. He joins them and, in his words, shares his machinations. He talks about voting history and says Bailey and Jason have never voted for a traitor. The thing is, as Utah pointed out a few minutes ago, Mark's own voting history isn't great. Um, Mark suggests that Jason is such a nice guy that he'd never double cross a fellow traitor. And he wants everyone in the group in on this so they can all join in on the questioning when the time comes. The problem is he acts like a game master, like telling people, okay, this is what you do and you do and you do. But he immediately begins with Kat and says, okay, so I want you to bring this up. She reacts right away by telling him she's playing her own game and really hates it when he and Steven tell her what to do. I don't blame her. Uh,
Yeah.
she gets a high five from someone and then says he's made her think it's him. And then everyone just kind of walks away from him. He realizes he's screwed up, which made me right at the time a little too late, Mark. But
Yeah.
I'm not sure that he actually learned that lesson anyway by as this episode goes on.
No, even even at round table, he's doing
Yeah.
things he really ought not to do.
So uh conversations about Mark continue in the two cars he's not in. He tells his side of the story in his own car, and he doesn't get a great reaction there either. So nobody's taking Mark's side. Um, they arrive at the mission, and it's similar to one we saw in the recent US and UK seasons. Players are tied to a bunch of poles while there are two puzzle makers. The difference this time is the puzzle is scattered over a field, not in a lake or a loch. They pick Noel and Utah because it will involve a lot of running around to get the pieces. But when the time comes for two players to step forward, Mark just steps in front of Utah and thus becomes designated as the second puzzle maker, which people
But
feel is not
but
cool.
but David, he misheard. He didn't hear them talking about Utah.
Well,
Don't you
we don't get
see?
that till later, but yeah, that is so strange that it happens that way, and it just so happens to be on a one where Paul doesn't say tell me who they are, he says step forward, because if they had said tell me who they are, then someone else would have said Nolan, Utah.
Yeah. It's just so sort of socially unaware. It's a very good
Yeah.
way to make enemies and alienate people.
Yes. Yes, how to lose friends and influence people negatively. Yes, he can write a book.
Yeah.
So anyway, the mission is if they assemble the puzzle within 20 minutes, they get $2,000. Paul gives Noel a knife, which he can use to cut people free. They immediately decide to cut Utah free. Would have been good if he were free to begin with. But it turns out that Paul gave them a rather dull knife, and it is taking Mark freaking forever. He's just cutting rope. And after 5 minutes, they switch, but Noel doesn't have any better success than Mark. And meanwhile, Mark is out there running around and, dying from getting puzzle pieces. Noel finally gets him loose with 9 minutes left, and Utah takes off. Then Noel must have learned how to use the knife because he gets Joe free much more quickly. And then Joe cuts Mike loose, followed by others. Eventually, the knife is handed off to Jason, who just starts using it like an axe or a machete, and it works much better.
Yeah.
So they get all the puzzle pieces into the ring with 25 seconds left. And they actually succeed. There isn't much drama. Like when they did it on the water in the US and UK, you had to worry about like pieces floating away and not being connected. Yeah, that's obviously not happening in a field.
It could blow away if it's windy.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. Well, I don't know. They said they were pretty heavy. So,
Or Mark could just pick one up and throw it around because he likes sabotaging things.
That's true. A tornado could come through, I suppose. I don't know if they have tornadoes in do they have tornadoes in New Zealand? I don't know.
No idea.
A whole
idea.
line of them just came through. There were 10 of them in the Chicago area last night. I am not in the Chicago area anymore, so that's good. I had one tornado hit this house already, so I don't need more. Anyway, after they solve the puzzle, Stephen, Kat, Donna, and Jane are still tied up. So they were the ones that people felt were the least useful. They are set free, but then after a helicopter drops off the silver, Paul says those four have a decision to make. There will either be a banishment or a murder tonight, and it's up to them. If they choose banishment and banish a faithful, $2,000, the $2,000 they just won, will be removed from the prize pool. But if they banish a traitor, $2,000 more will be added. If they choose murder, the four of them will get shields. And the four of them quickly choose banishment, which I think is probably the right decision in terms of keeping the peace. Not to mention that it would otherwise automatically mean a faithful is gone. So, I mean, you could try playing a really selfish game, but I don't think it's going to go well for you if you do it the other way.
Yeah, it reminded me a bit of episode one when the Molly and Whitney were given this choice right at the beginning of taking some money, and they could either take it themselves or return it to the
Mm.
pot. And both of them just sort of chose to do the thing that would make them look the most sort of trustworthy and
Which, by the way, I bet Whitney's regretting that decision now.
absolutely. Yeah, it's very much about appearances versus
Hmm.
reality or
Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So as they drive back from the mission, the people in Jane's car think Steven is the traitor. In another car, Utah tells us he's still firm in the belief that it's Mike, but he can't really bring it up because Mike is in the same car. Um, Back at the mansion, Bailey is sure Steven is faithful and Mike is the traitor. And she explains her reasoning to a group that includes Jane. So it looks like it's going to be a Mike versus Steven battle. And poof, we're at the round table. As of now, there's $36,500 in the prize pool. So it'll be $2,000 less or more by the end of it. Mark opens the discussions by bringing up Jason and Bailey, just as he'd mentioned previously. He says he approached Kat about it, and she rightly shuts him down and says he tried dictating to her. I don't know how he didn't see that coming. You know, you mentioned it earlier, and I mentioned earlier he didn't learn his lesson.
Yeah.
How did you not see this coming, Mark?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
yeah, I guess he's a I'm thinking trying to think of a nice way of saying it. He's just a eccentric,
Yes.
unusual
Yes.
person.
I think
And
he's very focused in logic and doesn't necessarily think about the impact on people.
yeah, the social
We might,
game.
if he were on Survivor or Big Brother, people might call him a game bot. Have you
Okay,
heard
yeah.
that term before?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Um. Anyway, uh, she points out, Kat points out how suspicious it makes him look, and he says he's just very confident, and Kat says, "Be less confident. You've made a lot of wrong calls." Jane asks why he asked Kat to do it, and Mark honestly says it's because she was next to Jason when he did something suspicious, and he thought it would be easier for himself if multiple independent people brought it up. So he's explaining his move. It's just too much, too much. Um, Mark, yeah, like I said, just too honest, too straightforward in a game that's not about that. Kat says, if you're faithful, you shouldn't have to play that way. You just do it. And this is where I start to shift and say, no, Kat, you're wrong. Faithful or traitor, you still need to be strategic.
Mhm.
But all right. Mark says he didn't want to put a target on his back, and she replies, you did. Then Donna brings up him stepping forward in the mission, and he claims, like you said, he was in the back and he thought he heard his name. Utah turns attention to Steven because he wanted time to think about whether to choose banish or murder, which I didn't mention because I didn't even notice it when it happened. That's how quickly that happened.
Yeah.
Um, Steven says the women all immediately decided on banish, and he just wanted a couple seconds to think. Kat comes at him and says, as a faithful, there was no decision to make. Steven, another person who uses logic, as we've discussed this episode, rightly says he just wanted to discuss it, even though the others say it was a no-brainer.
Yeah,
Kat gets,
I sorry,
yeah, no,
I felt really bad for
right,
Stephen. I think I would have done the same thing. I just would need a minute
yeah,
to like weigh it all up, figure out, wait a minute, let me just get this right in my head. What
yeah,
have we been asked to do? Do I understand this properly? I even yeah, even me watching it,
right,
I took a minute and thought, oh, what? Wait a minute, what's the pros and cons of each? What like
right.
so I don't think he
Same
was doing a
here.
bad thing.
But then Kat just gets super sarcastic with him.
Yeah.
Um, Mark says Well, since I've said my piece and so has Stephen, and Kat's, quote, gone on, he wants others to talk. And this sets Kat off again, and she calls him an arrogant prick. While I don't think she's been exactly acting on an even keel, Mark really does need to learn how to talk to people in a social strategy game, um, especially people who are already pissed at him. um, anyway, Utah takes them in a different direction as he turns things to Mike. Mike claims he just wants the faithful to win and he wanted to play his part. Ciale notes Mike's demeanor shift, and Mike says that he's found his voice. As I'm watching, it looks to me like he did a pretty good job of responding to their questions slash implied accusations. Then when Bailey tries to pile on, he turns on her and brings up how she alerted Whitney yesterday. She says she didn't tell Whitney that Mike had brought her up, and she just answered a question that anyone could have known. In response to a question from Mark, she says that she wasn't crying at the end because Whitney left, but rather because she had been wrong again. With that, Paul wanders back in from his tea break, and the time for talk is over. Time for voting. Stephen votes Mark. Utah gives a whole speech about how Mark is a shit faithful, and we'll come after him next, but for now it's Stephen. Noel, Stephen. Jason, Mark. Bailey says she's terrible at this and then votes correctly for Mike. Ben votes Stephen. And I'm reminded again that Ben exists in this game. When I say again, the first time was earlier in this podcast, because otherwise, who is that guy? Molly votes for Stephen because of the whole dumb thing from the prior night about Sia. Ciale votes Stephen. Mark votes Bailey. Jane votes Stephen. Kat says she's objective and sus on Stephen even more than Mark. So she votes for Stephen. And I will say, this is good. This is one thing I always advocate. You got to keep your emotions out of it. So she's pissed as hell at Mark, but she still votes Stephen.
Yeah.
Now, she's still wrong, but still, at least she was trying to be right.
Sure.
Joe votes Stephen. Mike says Bailey has convinced him, so he's voting Stephen. And Donna votes Stephen. So that's it for Stephen. He should have gotten up there and said, see ya. But unfortunately, he doesn't know that that's the reason. Stephen, of course, declares himself a faithful, but first he says he's always tried to get them to think about the game and evaluate all possibilities. Yeah, and in the end, that's what got him, trying to get people to stop and think for a moment. How dare you, Stephen? How dare you try to get people to think? Get out of the game.
Poor Stephen.
Yeah, I do feel bad for him. That between that and Sia, I mean, come on. We've seen some stupid reasons, but oh my God. Anyway, Paul leaves and Mark is sitting there smiling. The others immediately jump on him and ask why he's happy that a faithful left. Do they not remember him from episode 1 where he was just sitting there smiling, and we went over this once already? Because this seems like a repeat. But in any case, he says he was vindicated because he knew Stephen just wanted a few seconds to think. And, quote, it's a game. Kat says she's coming for him and adds to us that whether he's a faithful or a traitor, he's not a team player. She's not wrong about that. And we've seen people go after faithful who are not team players before.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. I get this is not a spoiler because I won't mention names, but what springs to mind is Australia season 1. There was a player who just was getting on everybody's nerves, and several of the players openly admitted, "I am going to vote you out not because I think you're a traitor. You're just annoying me." So, so yeah, we've heard players.
We had it in US season 2 as well.
Yeah, we've heard players just saying, "You."
Oh no, sorry. Canada. That's what I'm thinking of. Sorry, got my players confused.
Yeah, that someone might you're not necessarily a traitor, but you're not helping us as a
Right.
faithful, so we may as well get rid of you too.
Yeah. It's funny because I post these clips from traders on TikTok, and there are still people arguing with me about like clips that I posted months and months ago. I won't say the season or the person, but they'll be like, they should never have voted that person out. They knew that they were faithful. That's against what they should be doing in a game. And it's like, no, that they're like, the goal of the game is to get rid of traitors. It's like, no, it's not. The goal of the game is to win. However you win, that's the goal of the game. And sometimes it means getting rid of faithfuls.
Yeah.
And they get very mad about that. Um, Anyway, after roundtable, people go into groups to talk. Kat tells us she was the most sure she'd ever been and was way off. Huh, really? Maybe you should follow someone's advice to stop and think for a moment instead of being all sarcastic when someone explains something to you.
Yeah.
That's just my suggestion. I don't know.
And you just earlier she was having a go at Mark for being too confident. And I thought,
Right.
well, you're doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, and then instead she says she's going after Mark, and then others join in.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, others tell Mark to his face that he shouldn't have acted the way he did after Stephen left, and he admits they're right. He says he's not there to hurt people's feelings. He promises to rein it in, play better, and make up with Kat. He still says he misheard on the mission, and re- and really pissed her off. I was like, who's the her? Oh yeah, Kat. Um, he also adds to us that he's going to try to cause the least emotional distress going forward, which, yeah, Mark, that's probably a good idea to not cause emotional distress.
Who knew?
Yeah. But then he also tells the others that he's played the worst game any faithful has played, possibly in the history of the game.
I mean, I wouldn't go
So,
that far.
yeah, I mean, so Mark didn't see the Traitors Australian season two?
I knew you were going to say that.
Sorry, but I mean, it's well known. Um, Utah is impressed by Mark's reactions and then pulls Bailey aside to let her know he thinks she's right about Mike being a traitor. And that's where we end it. In the previews for next week, suspicion continues on Mike, but then he does something related to a shield. And even though I watched it, the whole thing is so confusing that it doesn't add up and doesn't tell us anything.
Yeah, I guessed they're fooling us a little bit. Maybe he just wins a shield in a challenge or something. It's going to
Yeah,
be something really
I don't know.
straightforward, and it's not
Yeah,
really. Or I don't know. He takes a shield and throws it at Paul, or destroys
ah,
it, or I don't know, or he wins the shield and like sacrifices it. I'm not sure. Not sure.
right. Yeah, I don't either. And there we are. I have
Public.
one closing thought first.
Oh, okay. Go for it.
Unfortunately, it's the same thing I've said already, but I feel like I need to repeat myself. The whole idea that anyone using logic and trying to think things through must be a traitor, you may have noticed, is getting on my last nerve.
Yeah.
First they aimed at Noel because of it, then Steven and Mark, though of course his interpersonal skills had a lot to do with that. This is supposed to be a thinking game. I watch it because it is a thinking game. That is why I get annoyed at some of the casting choices of the US version going straight celebrity. A bunch of them are playing like Bree was advocating, just throwing out names and wherever it lands. People, please listen to Steven. Pause, take a breath, and think.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they still have. They've managed to find two traitors and five banishments, which isn't too bad. But yeah, what I've noticed is usually in the traitors, I think almost always, whoever leaves at the first banishment leaves for a very silly reason. They usually
Yes.
they gang up on someone for something ridiculous, something really trivial. But then that kind of changes as time goes on. But yeah, maybe we're still we're halfway through the season now. We're at episode
Yeah.
6, and some of the players are still relying on really silly, trivial reasons to get rid of someone. Like Stephen, you said, "See ya." That means you're going to murder me. Like
Hmm.
silly things like that.
Yes. So that's my only closing thought, which was also a middle thought and an early thought. And,
A permeating thought.
yes.
Now we've probably kind of already answered this. We've got a few questions. We've got two questions from Harry on Instagram, and Harry's first question was simply, "Did Traitors New Zealand go as you expected this week?" For me, no. I didn't. Didn't. In lots of ways, I think I probably predicted the murders wrong.
Hmm.
I didn't think Mike was going to step up and come for Whitney so soon at all, if he was ever planning, if I ever saw him doing something like that. And I didn't think, I thought Whitney would last a little bit longer.
Hmm.
Didn't sort of think of Stephen really as a target that everyone would almost unanimously come for. So yeah, these two episodes very much surprised me. How about you?
Yeah. Yeah. I said earlier, that I was wrong. I thought Noel would be an easy target, but then Mike stepped up and saved him, basically.
Yeah.
Uh, Steven, we had a hint last week, when it was the whole, Will versus W E apostrophe LL as opposed to WILL.
Yeah.
Um, so there was a hint there that he
Mm,
wasn't going to be in trouble, but yeah, who would have predicted that it was for those stupid reasons?
yeah. So well, Harry's first question was about us looking back on these two episodes. His next question is a kind of a prediction question for us. So I was sending a few messages back and forth to Harry on Instagram. Harry is certain that Mike is on the way out within at most the next two episodes. He's really certain Mike is going,
Hmm.
he's going to get banished, and that Jane will therefore be the last traitor standing for now. And Harry asks if we have any predictions. Who do we think Jane might recruit? Uh,
Hmm.
I
I
had a couple of thoughts. My my I, my instinct was, and I kind of replied this to Harry already, actually, that I thought maybe she'll just pick one of the women that she's quite close to. I think she gets on with Donna and Kat quite well. Maybe that's just because she was in their team in the mission this week and it's in my mind.
Either of those two would be so amusing. Okay. Well, first, let me say I agree with him that I think Mike is going in the next couple episodes. Um,
Probably
Cat,
right.
I think, and I hate to use this word because it gets bandied about too much, but I do think we've seen her acting too emotionally.
Hmm.
I know she was pissed off at Mark, and I totally get it. But she just kept going with Mark and with Steven and the sarcasm and everything else. So I don't think Jane could make her a traitor. I just don't think she's I don't think she could do it.
Yeah, but then maybe that's a reason for Jane to pick her because she is going to do what she did with Jackie, pick someone that she thinks will be bad to try and get her out again really quickly. Who knows?
Yeah, but she could also just turn on Jane right away and be like, "You were my friend and you've done this to me."
I
I'd be
guess.
worried if I were Jane.
Uh, I also have a feeling that Jane could pick, if this is going to happen,
Mhm.
could recruit Ben, who you forgot,
Yeah.
because we've seen a couple of clips of them being close, and they've included Ben saying, "I
Hmm.
think Jane's a traitor. I'm going to keep her close to me." It might just be quite a nice turnaround, a nice little twist if he was then to be recruited and have to suddenly play the game really differently. That could be fun.
Yeah.
Uh, I
Someone
have
will say, "Oh, he's playing the game differently," and they'll be like, "Yeah, he's actually on TV. He's actually."
yeah. Well, we've seen this in other seasons. We've seen recruits
Yeah.
sort of appear halfway through a season that we
Hmm.
I didn't get much airtime at all before then,
Yeah.
and do quite well from it. We have another question from Stephen. Stephen's been on the podcast with me several times. He's co-hosted with me, and is a huge fan of the show. Loyal listener to the pod. Stephen asks, is it inevitable that traitors always have to betray one another in this game? Is this really the smartest gameplay move for a traitor? Or is it a smarter move for traitors to be faithful to one another as much as possible for as long as they can? So, I think his question is based on what Mike's done. Is it a wise
Yeah,
idea for a traitor to get to turn on one another early in the game, or should they go as long as they can together?
I think they should go longer than Mike did. I mean, there are some times where it's like, okay, if I don't get you first, you're going to get me. We saw that in US season 2. They were kind of all plotting against each other at the same time.
Yeah,
There was no indication that Whitney was doing anything. He could have gotten rid of Noel, another faithful, easily. All he had to do was not say anything, and Noel was gone.
yeah,
Was he worried that the two women would gang up on him? Maybe. And yeah, there's always this thing. I have to get them before they get me. But I didn't see any indication that was going to happen. So I do think it was too soon from our vantage point. Um, I maybe there was something we didn't see that he thought, she was coming after him or something, but I thought it was too soon for exactly the reason that I now believe, like the previous person who asked the question, I now believe he's gone next week sometime. Is he suddenly came out of his shell and boom, and all of a sudden people are like, huh, that's odd.
yeah. I also think that as a traitor, you should probably stick with your fellow traitors as long as possible. Like it is maybe inevitable that eventually at least some of you have to turn
Hmm.
on each other, but I think you should hold out on that for as long as possible because well, I think you have to I think as a traitor, if you want to do well and not have I think you have to try and build trust with your fellow traitors. Um, I think as soon as you do what Mike's done and what we've seen other traitors, I'm particularly thinking of Australia season two, as soon as you turn on your fellow traitors early on and without some of the traitor team knowing about it, you just ruin any sense of trust.
Hmm.
I just so I think, and Jane has said it herself. She said,
Yeah,
I'm never going to trust him now." So I think that's really fatal. I don't know how you get to the end of the game now as a
right.
traitor when your other traitor just doesn't trust anything you say or do. So I think you need to hold out as long as possible,
Yeah.
and either turn on them late on, or maybe just don't turn on them. Maybe two traitors could just win this,
I mean, they
or three
could.
traitors. It's,
They could. The question is, do you really have that much trust in them at the end of the game, in the, split or steal game
yeah, it
that
would be
comes at the
tough.
end in that situation?
Hmm.
I mean, maybe if you really built trust, if two traders came in, worked closely together the whole game, maybe knocked out one or two other traders together, but always stood side by side, always played together, maybe they could agree, and it was a large enough amount of money, then maybe they could agree. We just haven't seen that happen yet.
Yeah, yeah. Now I have uh something to add in here. Just I alluded to this at the start of the podcast. I'm circling back round to it now.
Hmm.
Just a little bit of fun news. I've spoken about this on the podcast before, but I'm in London, and something exciting Traitors related is happening soon in London. The Strange Affair of Paul is a new comedy play. It's going to be part of the Camden Fringe here in London, and it is a play all about a washed-up detective who becomes obsessed with why Paul from the Traitors Australia season one is almost completely edited out of the show. That is what this play is about.
That's amazing. I know you've mentioned it before, but that's still amazing to me that this grew this way.
Yes. It's written and performed by Callum Jones. I am going to attend the show on Wednesday, the 7th of August. It's on for 3 nights, I think. So I'm going on Wednesday, 7th of August, and at least one other Trader listener will be there too. It's at the Hen and Chickens Theatre in London. And actually, Paul himself was at the theatre a couple of weeks ago. He was on a quick visit from Australia to London. He met up with Callum. I couldn't join them sadly, but Paul or Callum, one of them, maybe both, had posted about it on Instagram, which was really fun to see. So I'll be there on 7th of August. Uh, this is a call out to any London-based Trader listeners. If you're going to the show, send me a message in advance or just come and say hi if you spot me. I'm seriously tempted to wear my traitor's cloak,
I was gonna say you have to.
but then also don't want to steal thunder from the performer, so maybe I shouldn't do that. I have my trader phone case, so I might just walk around holding up
I
my
like that you
phone.
held it up as if this weren't an audio
Well, it's for
podcast.
it was for you, David.
Oh, okay. Well, I'd seen it before, so yes.
Um, or you might just recognize, my face if you follow me on
Yes.
social media. If you follow the Trader podcast, you'll see what I look like because sometimes I put up little videos or pictures and my stories and stuff like that. So 7th of August, come see the show, especially if you've seen Traitors Australia. You will be
Yes.
very much in on the joke.
Yes. Yeah, speaking of some of your little posts, and you posted a picture on your story of a great studio that I understand you're buying me to help with the podcast.
Yes, that's where all the donations are actually going. It's not a flight here, it's to build you a home recording booth. Yes, it'll be on its way soon in pieces from
Yeah.
Amazon.
Yes.
Now we have been playing a game throughout this podcast that is the Trader Traitor. It's time for us to reveal our lie. If we lie, did you lie, David?
I did.
Okay, uh,
Did you?
I did lie. Yes.
I know what
Uh,
yours is. You said you'd
oh,
send me the booth from Amazon.
oh, that
Ah,
was
I got you.
that wasn't a lie. That was sarcasm. It's
Oh,
different.
oh, okay, cat. Um,
Yeah. Any idea what I lied to you about, David?
no, not really. Um, I'm guessing. I don't think Paul came to visit London on a quick trip. People don't hop, skip, and jump from Australia on a quick trip. So I think that did not happen.
That actually did happen. Paul was
Damn it.
here. Yeah, he posted about it. He met with Callum. Our paths didn't quite cross at the same time, which is
Mhm.
a shame. But yeah, he said he was on I think he was traveling around the UK, but he was very briefly in London.
Ah, okay.
So that was not my lie. My lie was that when I was talking about episode 5 and I was talking about the mission, I named the people who volunteered to be the people in the boxes. And I was reading them
Hmm.
out and I said Mark and Mike, oh, those are my brothers' names. And that was my lie.
When you said that, I was like, oh, I didn't know that his brother's names were
Yeah.
that. But
Well, one of them, it's a half lie because I do have a brother called Michael. So some people do call him like Mick or Mike, but my other brother is called Peter, not Mark. So that was my lie. And
okay.
I thought you might buy it because they all start with an M, and you might be like, oh,
Yeah.
Matthew, Mark, okay,
Yeah.
there's.
I almost made a joke about the books of the Bible, but I wasn't sure about that either. So,
Yeah. Hurrah! I got you. Uh,
yeah.
now, uh,
Now,
now,
yes.
I've got a list, got a few suggestions.
Always.
I'll run you through them, but I think I know what one I'm going to go for. You told a story about talking about someone at your old work, and then they overheard you. But actually, I think That you probably did do that. Feels like something that you would do and not care about. Um, oh, you said that just something in the episode that I must have missed. You said that Paul in episode 6, instead of trying to take down one of the portraits, he said, "I'll have my people take care of it later." That passed me by, so I thought maybe that could be a lie, but I think I just missed it. Um, you talked about the mission when they had to cut one another free, and you talked about Noel. Noel cut someone free and then someone else, and I just wondered if that was a really small lie that actually Noel only cut one person free, not two people. However, I'm going to go for this one. You mentioned tornadoes. You said, oh, 10 tornadoes came through Chicago, and you said something about a tornado hitting your house. I think that one of those, I think your house has not been hit by a tornado.
Wrong.
No, man, I was doing a cat. I was really confident. I was like, oh, I've got it. I've got it this time.
It was when was it? Was it 2006 maybe?
Wow.
That sounds, I'm just trying to think of how old my kids were at the time. Um, yeah, I think it was 2006. A tornado came through, and I have lived in the Midwest of the U.S. Tornado area for my entire life, and so there was a tornado warning, and we were watching on TV, and it was like, huh, it's coming kind of right towards us here. Okay, we'll get the kids in the basement and everything, and then we were downstairs, and then it was like, huh, it really might be coming here.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I'm going to run upstairs and get like car keys and things like that you don't want flying around just in case. And as I was up there, it was night, so I couldn't see anything. As I was up there, if you know anything about tornadoes, you know if you hear a freight train noise and your ears start to pop, yeah, both of those happened. So I was like, oh crap, and went downstairs. And yes, we huddled in the basement right across from where I'm sitting now, under some, in the strongest walled area there, and
Mm.
just huddled there as we heard it whip through. It took off some shingles, some siding, punched our garage backwards and in, the door in and the back in, and yet somehow left the grill 6 feet away completely untouched. Um, and so yeah, we had to replace the garage, replace the roof, replace half the siding, replace a shed, all those good things.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
Uh, but you were all okay.
we were all fine.
Right.
Yes. So
Did
um,
did you include that story though because you thought I would think it was a lie?
yes, absolutely.
Of course you did. And I fell for it.
Yes, you did.
Well, what you need to tell me then? What did you lie about?
Well, my lie was about as small as your lie was, but it was about the game. Uh, at the very end, I talked about the things Mark was listing off that he said he would do. He never said he'd make up with Kat.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was too small for me to notice. No idea. Well done,
Um,
I suppose.
yeah, he said he would rein it in, play better, and be helpful instead of a hindrance, but
Okay.
nothing,
Yes.
nothing about making up with her.
Yeah. Okay. Well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Uh, Now, as always, you can leave reviews or follow us on wherever you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. You could also send us some questions for the next episode or thoughts on the episode in any of those places. You can some people leave comments on Spotify. Uh, you can also get in touch and follow on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at the Trader Podcast, or on X at the Trader Pod. And you can also email me at the Trader Podcast at gmail.com. David, where can we find you?
All over the place. In social media and reality TV podcasting. You can find all my various accounts through my link tree at linktree/David Bloomberg with a dot before the EE in that URL. Or you could find me directly on Twitter and Blue Sky as at David Bloomberg, and on the video platforms TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram as at David Bloomberg TV. And because Threads is connected to Instagram, I'm at David Bloomberg TV there as well. Speaking of TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, we mentioned this at the top of the podcast. I post videos there. And so I've been posting at least one, often more reality TV short videos every day. With US Big Brother starting, it'll definitely increase. And lately, they've been a combination of the Traitors New Zealand, the Mole Season 2 that just ended, The Amazing Race Canada, and even a couple for The Hungry Games, which is a show about Alaskan bears competing. It it's the most ridiculous thing. The narrator, I wish I could have put this in. You'd have absolutely thought it was a lie. Um, the narrator is from New Zealand, I believe, and he just has a blast with it, and he makes little comments like, "Oh, she's not going after the food. It's like she doesn't even realize she's competing." Um, and so they rank them, and so I have a couple of videos for that, but here in the US, it's on Peacock. It's basically they fooled us. It's a funny way to fool us into watching a documentary about Alaskan bears, is what I think it is. But
Okay.
still, I enjoyed it. Also, US Big Brother, as I mentioned, is starting this week. So I will be back weekly on the Rob Has a Podcast Network with my podcast on Why Blank Lost. And I recorded a preview podcast about 2 hours before we recorded this one. So by the time you hear this, it will already be posted. So there we are. Like I said, all over the place.
Fantastic. And we will be back next week as we move into the second half of Traitors New Zealand Season 2. Until then, keep us on your radar.
And don't take this the wrong way. See ya.